God is good.
All the time.
All the time.
God is good.
Amen. Are you familiar with Neil White? Have you heard of Neil White? Does anyone know him? No? No, that's excellent. Back in the 90s, Neil White was a publisher. He started off as a kind of like, working for the newspaper, journalist, worked his way up, became editor, and had a chance to buy a small magazine. Most of us here have probably never heard of the Mississippian Gulf Coast. He's down on the Gulf Coast, and he's really liking the lifestyle that he's involved in. He likes wearing nice clothes. He likes to buy new cars. Likes to look good. Likes to buy new cars for his wife. Sends his kids to private boarding school type environments. He's really a pace setter, and he's enjoying this lifestyle. He likes the attention that it brings him. And so when family members call and say, hey, you're this big-time publisher, we need money, no problem, let me lend you some money. Starts doing some stuff at church, and he's a little bit generous at church. He likes the attention, so he becomes more generous at church. And he's just known in the community for being this great guy. But he's not bringing in as much money as he's spending. And he's generous, and he likes the attention of being generous, and he likes to have the expensive watch and the nice shoes. So he says, I'm a businessman. And he had a couple different bank accounts. He had a personal bank account, and he had a business bank account, he had a vacation bank account, he had a school fund for his kids' bank account. So he said, I know what I can do. I'll write one check to this bank account, and I'll move money that I don't have here, but I'll write another check and move it to another account. And they have a technical term for that. They call that check kiting. Well, he got up to $750,000 in check kiting, and next thing you know, he gets a knock on the door, and he's arrested. He goes to prison. And down in the South, they put him in Carville, Louisiana. Now, what's in Carville, Louisiana that would be noteworthy? Huh?
Is that where Angola is?
No, that's not where that prison is. That's a completely different prison than where Neil White goes. Angola, you don't always come out in one piece. That has a reputation for a lot of bloodshed. Now, Carville, the federal prison is no longer there. At the end of the 90s, they closed it down. But for many, many years, exactly. Now our medical profession says, wait a minute, that's a leprosarium. There's lepers there. Yeah, so there was a federal prison on the grounds of the leper colony. So Neil White is put in prison there. His cellmate has a nickname of Doc. He's a doctor. And one of the times, Neil writes a memoir called The Sanctuary of Outcasts. Have you read it? It's a great book. I read it. Someone recommended it to me, and it turned out to be a pretty good read. And so his cellmate is Doc, and he tells a story in there how one guy has a mole, and so Doc cuts it off just in case it might be bad. It might be cancer, so I'm going to cut that off. Some of the friends that he makes in there, he realizes this: I never would have associated with them on the outside world. And he comes to the conclusion that some of the best friends worth having and worth keeping are those who are covered in scars. Fascinating book on the history of leprosy in America. I found out through reading that book that armadillos carry leprosy. Yeah. There's about, depending on what source you look at, from 100 to 500 new cases of leprosy in America, mostly in Louisiana and Texas. And it's from people coming in contact with armadillos. There's about 250,000 new cases of leprosy globally, but in America, at any given time, we have 5,000 people with leprosy walking around. We've come a long way, though, because 100, 150 years ago, how did we treat someone with leprosy? We shipped them off to a leper colony. We've come to find out that leprosy isn't really a flesh-eating disease, by the way. Your body becomes numb without what's been called the gift of pain. Your body is numb. where the bacterial infection comes through leprosy. You don't feel anything, and so you don't take care of that part of your body. Isn't that ironic? How many of us would be glad to be rid of aches and pains, or if I stub my toe, not feel it, or burn myself pouring hot tea, not feel that, but it's actually very detrimental. So, so there you have it. I share that to kind of get us in the mindset of what Alyssa read for us. Great job reading. Luke chapter 5. And if you haven't had a chance to open your Bible, please turn to Luke chapter 5. I think to kind of help us understand this text, this story, we need to recognize the difference in the way we treat people with leprosy today as opposed to biblical times. See, in biblical times, you notice how the text starts off. He's in one of the cities, right? Luke records, while he was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. Lepers aren't going to survive out in a rural area. They're not going to farm, right? They're not going to be hunters. They need to be in a city so that they can do what? Yeah, thank you, Wes. That they have to beg. That's how you're going to make your money. Back then, that was your sentence. You're a beggar for life. You know, there's no chance of parole from that sentence. But the bigger difference, you know, today we try to, I guess, have medical advances to help people with leprosy, where back then there was no medical hope for them at all. I guess the big difference was back then there was a twofold pain that people with leprosy suffered. You know, the first is you're socially ostracized, right? I mean, in the Old Testament, the leper is supposed to, you know, put their hand over their face as they walk, if they're around people, and just shout out what? Who remembers? Unclean, unclean. Well, that unclean isn't just physically, guys. So the first pain they suffer is you're a social outcast. No one wants to be around you. But secondly, you're not allowed to worship. You're not allowed to go to the temple because you're not just physically unclean, but ceremonially you're unclean. And I think until you kind of get your mind wrapped around that, it's really hard to appreciate this text. Jesus goes in the city. There's a guy, and notice it doesn't say his finger is gone from leprosy. Or like that great movie with Steve McQueen when he's going to escape from the French prison, Papillon. You remember that? And he's trying to escape, and he goes to the leper, and the guy's smoking the cigar. You guys remember that scene? Yeah, and before the guy will help him out, he gives him the cigar. And the guy's got like no lips, and I'm looking at them like, oh, oh. It's not just that his nose is missing. Luke says he is full of leprosy. So I imagine his toes are gone. And imagine the stink from that as your body's experiencing that. So he probably stumbles a little bit because he doesn't have that big toe for balance. Probably missing a few fingers. His ears probably look like an Olympic wrestler, right? With cauliflower ear, it's all chewed up. And he comes up to Jesus, and a logical person would just start backing away, you know. When that type of person approaches you, you don't walk up to them, but he's full of leprosy, and he comes up to Jesus. And here's a guy, socially he's ostracized. Religiously he's ostracized. And he's probably thinking he's done something wrong. Because in that day and age they believed in what was called the divine law of retribution. If you suffered sickness or pain, you sinned. Or someone in your family sinned, and you're being punished for it. And he comes up to Jesus with all of this disease, and he falls down, and he begs him. But Luke says it like how? When he saw Jesus, he fell on his face, and he begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. You guys remember Ralph's Bar and Grill over by New Beeson Well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right by your house, yeah. We had some great burgers over there. When we first moved here, and as we became better friends, and you said, hey man, they've got these big burgers over there. I'm telling you what, those burgers were the size of a pizza. And they were like $2, so I don't know how he did that.
He did look his clothes.
His clothes, it didn't work. That's a good point. Well, did you guys hear about the time that Jesus went to Ralph's Bar and Grill? You didn't hear about this? It didn't make the news? He goes in there. Do you guys remember the guy with the black eye patch in town? We don't remember because he doesn't have it anymore. Because Jesus went in there and he said, "Be well, my son." And he touched him and that eye patch fell off and all of a sudden he had an eye again. And there was another guy in a wheelchair. Jesus went up and touched him and said, "Be well, my son." And he got up out of the wheelchair. And then he went up to this one redneck and he reached out his hand and the guy said, "Whoa, whoa, don't touch me, I'm on disability." If you're willing, you can make me clean. You know, it seems like most sickness, that's why. I know. And that's why. Most sickness causes sympathy in us, doesn't it? You know, Wendy works in cancer, and so whenever you hear that someone has cancer, right? How do we, I mean, Nancy, you know, I mean, as soon as you hear that someone has cancer, it pulls on the heartstrings. You know, when people have little kids. Well, I work with a guy right now, and his girlfriend's son is 35. And he's been in the hospital over 200 times. He has some type of immune deficiency. A couple weeks ago, they thought it was leukemia. You know, and I'm thinking, he's 35, and they're just now starting to figure this out, right? But as soon as you hear someone's in the hospital 200 times, 200 times, it causes sympathy. Leprosy doesn't cause sympathy, it causes repulsion. I mean, if you're going to be honest about it, someone with leprosy, one of us in this room, if I told you I had leprosy, you know, you're going to say, "Whoa, I need a little distance." The truth is, I think 98% of people are immune to what's Hansen's disease, is the real name for it. Very, very few people can even contract leprosy. If you touch it, you're not going to get it. Most of us are immune to it. Sickness causes sympathy. We're sympathetic towards people who are sick, usually. But you've got to admit there's sometimes where we're repulsed. And that's very interesting because Jesus does something out of the ordinary. Look closely at the text. I imagine that many of you say, "Oh yeah, I knew that already." Jesus stretches out his hand and touches him, saying, "I will be clean." And the leprosy left him. Jesus doesn't heal him first and then touch him. He touches him while he's still a leper. He shows him real compassion. You know, never underestimate the power of hugging someone or shaking someone's hand or putting your hand on their shoulder when you talk to them. Jesus says, "I am," and he touches a man who hasn't been hugged in years, who has gone at arm's length from all contact with humanity. And I bet there's someone in your life that you know right now that's been at arm's length from people. And that power of touch. I love you. I accept you. I have compassion. And so Jesus could have healed him from a distance and then hugged him or high-fived him or whatever, I don't know. But he reaches out and he accepts him. I remember when I was in college, first of all, and we just shared this last night, I was so dumb that I thought I only had to take preaching classes when I went to college. I didn't know you had to do other classes to get your bachelor's degree. But as I'm wrapping up my time, after I finished all my preaching classes and all my Greek and all of my counseling and all these hard classes, my last semester, they said, "Well, you had to fill the requirement," and I don't know what it's called in the humanities, but I had two choices. I could either do psychology or sociology. To finish up your hours, you have to take one of these two classes. These are your alternatives. So I thought, well, most psychologists are kind of quacks, right? So I'm going to do sociology. That's what I'm thinking. So that's going to help me understand people. So I signed up for sociology, and it was, for the most part, it's pretty interesting. And one day we're in class, and the teacher brings in like this panel of people. And I don't remember what she was teaching on that day, but it was sociology. And we're all sitting in the seats and where the teacher normally stands. There's 6 or 8 people up there. And I don't know what type of social test or, research she was doing, but at the end she's like, now I want you to, class, come up and meet these people, welcome them to class, How do you meet people in your culture, right? So we're shaking hands with them, and, some people are hugging. Well, so glad you could join us. It's a Christian college. It's good to have you here. And then the teacher said they all have AIDS. This is still in the 90s, so AIDS really wasn't. I remember when AIDS was called GRIDS, gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. You guys remember that? Yeah. The 90s, it still wasn't much further for socially acceptable. And then the teacher said, you'd have to drink 6 gallons of vomit to catch AIDS from someone with AIDS. I thought that was pretty gross. You'd have to have 10 gallons of saliva just to have, exposure to the AIDS. Not much blood or other bodily fluids, but all these other things. And it was kind of a wake-up call. There's some people you treat like they're lepers. In fact, how do we use leper now? We use it like a metaphor. It's almost a cliche. Oh, they're treated like a leper. They're a social leper. And here's Jesus. He reaches out and he touches someone who doesn't know what it's like to be touched. So I read this paragraph, and it reminds me that I say I love you sometimes because why? You do it too. We all do it. We say, oh, I love that person. Why? Because that's what we're supposed to do, right? That's what good Christians are supposed to do. We have to love all people because God says love them. But do we really? Jesus doesn't just say, I love you. He touches the guy. He makes contact with him. So it makes me wonder how often love is conditional. I read this paragraph. It also reminds me to check my motives in life. Jesus doesn't do this to be esteemed by the crowd, or to be recognized by the people, or to be appreciated. Oh, Jesus, you touched that leper. You healed him. He touches him and he heals him for that guy. I know it's not for the crowd because as the paragraph goes on, he charges him, don't tell anyone. Go and show yourself to the priest. The priest, back in Levitical times, would look at someone and they would check the white spot of flesh and come back in a month or whatever it was. And if it's gone away, then I'll make sure that you're recognized as being cleaner. Go and show the priest. Make an offering for your cleansing, as Moses commanded, for a proof to them. But verse 15 says, even more than ever, the report went abroad and great crowds gathered to hear him as he healed of their infirmities. And Jesus, don't tell anyone. His motive wasn't so that he would be recognized and affirmed and become popular. And then Jesus responds how when the crowd starts to gather. Oh, here, come on. Circle up, guys. Come on. I've got the words of life for you. Sit around me. I've been waiting for this day all my life. That's not how he responds. The crowd gets bigger. And verse 16 says, but he would withdraw to a desolate place, right? He would withdraw to desolate places and pray. So it reminds me, I don't value seclusion. I don't value meditation. I don't value the ability to just unplug and connect with God. And I'll just be honest and vulnerable. That's probably my greatest struggle as a Christian. I'm not saying that's my biggest sin. I'm not saying that's my darkest secret. But I'll say that's my biggest struggle. Just be able to shut everything off and go find a quiet time. To just be in a desolate place where my phone is shut off, internet is shut off, music is shut off, and to just be alone. That's hard. I tell myself, when the kids are grown, when life slows down, when all this, that's not how Jesus responds to them. He doesn't wait until the time is right. He makes that time. It's hard. So by our standards, Jesus is doing ministry all wrong. He's doing it all wrong. From our standards for 2000, what year is this? 2015. I can think for a minute. 2015. It's almost gone too, isn't it? Years. Jesus is doing it all wrong. Number one, he touches the leper when what? He's still unclean. You don't do that. That's not safe. if you want to be honest, we wait till sinful people are cleaned up and at our level of acceptable maturity before we embrace them. We put people on probation, spiritually speaking. I'm talking as a culture. I'm not pointing fingers at many of you in this room. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm making a broad, sweeping statement about church and our culture and our people. I mean, if it steps on your toes, then so be it. You know, if you're feeling that, then that's fine. But oftentimes we wait till people get their act cleaned up. You made your bed, now lie in it. When you get it straightened up, come back and I'll be here for you. That's not how Jesus does it. Number two, and this one just blows my mind. He forbids this leper to go and broadcast what's obviously a success. Man, if something good happens, I'm like, go tell people about it. Man, let's get that word out there. And Jesus says, quietly, go to the priest, show them, make your offering. Let's prove it to them. But let's keep this between you and me. That's wrong. That's just flat out wrong. And then number three, Jesus really blows it big time here. He ditches the crowd. Finally, he gets that crowd around him, right? Isn't that what it's all about? And then he goes and he withdraws to a desolate place, a lonely place. So maybe what the biblical story here of Jesus and the leper teaches us most, maybe we need a new set of standards. Maybe we should replace our standards for his.